There is no way that he just said this. In a very interesting turn of events, a recent interview has come out asking John Schneider some extremely hard-hitting questions. We're going to break down the interview, discuss what John Schneider said, and also discuss what it means going forward for the Toronto Blue Jays. They ask questions about players. They ask questions about his questionable decisions over the past couple of years, and they ask questions about his feelings on management. Stay tuned for all that in this episode. But before we do, if you're part of the percentage who aren't subscribed to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It would mean the world to myself and Peter as we're on the road now to 14,000 subscribers. But without further ado, let's dive right into it. And this was a hard-hitting article that just dropped from Sportsnet. We're going to go over the entire interview and kind of discuss what it can mean going forward for the Toronto Blue Jays. Because at this point, there's about 4 games left in the Toronto Blue Jays season. And there's not much, like we've discussed throughout the past week, and we've covered ad nauseum here. There's not much left for the Toronto Blue Jays to play for this year. And heading into the offseason, a big question mark is going to be if there are changes to management from the top down. And from the top down, considering Mark Shapiro, meaning Ross Atkins, and especially John Schneider, as some fans think that he deserves to be on the hot seat. An interview came out, and it's one of the more surprising interviews that we've read in a while because it really dives into the nitty and gritty of John Schneider. And let's just start with it because it was a Q&A with John Schneider on his future with the Blue Jays and on player communication. And quite frankly, he gave some very insightful details and information. And it's very good to see some transparency between the team and ultimately at this point, management in John Schneider. So we're going to go through all the questions. And as we read these, let me know in the comment section what your thoughts are on this. So let's dive right into the first one. And they started simple. They said, how have you coped with this season obviously being a disaster? He said, it's been different, obviously. I've coped fairly well. The staff has been great. And I always go back to the veteran players that are here and how they help keep things going in a positive direction. But it's definitely different and definitely difficult to not live up to expectations that you had 8 months ago, but you try to take positives out of it each day, each series, and focus on what we can be better at going forward. So they kind of start off pretty simple here. How have you coped with the season? Obviously, it's been a disastrous season for John Schneider, for the Toronto Blue Jays, and it seems, and as we go through this, when they start to hit and ask some of the more hard-hitting questions, start to hit on some of the things about his future with the Toronto Blue Jays, you'll start to see that he's obviously very disappointed in this season, as he should be. It was a very brutal year, but a lot of the veterans were very disappointed as well. And we can dive into the next one here. In 2022 is when John Schneider took over. Correct me if I'm wrong. You were sort of, in an interesting situation. Fix this before it flies off the rails. That was back in 2022. In 23, you were battling a number of issues over the course of the season. Managed to keep it on the rails and get to the postseason. This season is a constant battle, and now you're in a different role where you've gone from win now to prepping to win in the future. The fluctuations in your role and your work over that time has been very interesting. And they basically asked what his thoughts are on that. And John Schneider basically went on to say that he thinks he hit the nail on the head where he tried to keep everything where it should be in 2022 and only worried about winning each night first and foremost, and then try to make certain things a little cleaner, a little better along the way. And he basically goes on to say that last year it was John Schneider's first full win now mode, and ultimately they did some okay things. And some very interesting quotes came through here, battling through adversity on and off the field with different stuff, whether it's Anthony Bass or Matt Chapman yelling at me for pitching to Ohtani in the first innings, things that pop up over the course of the year that you want to try to nip in the bud. And then you get to the playoffs, back-to-back year, exiting not the way you want to, especially last year. So that was very interesting. He directly commented on, of course, the Anthony Bass situation. And more interesting, he also commented on the Matt Chapman situation, which, if we remember back, he basically yelled at John Schneider in the first inning for pitching to Shohei Ohtani with runners on base instead of intentionally walking him. John Schneider was under fire at the time, and people were thinking, hey, why is Matt Chapman the players? He's lost the locker room, all these things. And last year was John Schneider's first win-now mode year. And now this was supposed to be a win-now mode as well. And it seems like John Schneider is at the point of his managerial career with the Blue Jays that I think next year is going to be very interesting, because if they're trying to go back into a retool, I mean, John Schneider is still not a terrible manager for that. He obviously took over from Charlie Montoyo back in 2022, halfway through the year, because the Jays were struggling and Montoyo was more of the get themselves over and out of the rebuild manager. And now John Schneider was supposed to be the win now manager. He comes in and he gets swept in back-to-back wildcard series and then doesn't make the playoffs the next year. Obviously, it's not entirely John Schneider's fault, but a lot of it's on Ross Atkins, on the personnel, and there are a lot of things there that need to improve. That being said, it's still partially on John Schneider's, and you think it's partially on John Schneider, and it's partially his fault. You think about the José Berríos move. You think about a lot of different moves. Even the first, even game 2 in the wild card series where he pulled Kevin Gausman, which was questionable. So there are a lot of things that were questionable in John Schneider's decision, and he dives into them a little bit more, but it's very intriguing. And this was very This was a very intriguing question to me. So the club's decision-making process was obviously the main focal point at the end of last postseason. How different is what you're doing now from where you were at the beginning of the season to where you were in the postseason last year in terms of communicating the thinking and players understanding how decisions are made? And the reason for that is, we remember last postseason, they obviously, when they pulled José Berríos, Ross Atkins came out, he was under fire because he basically blamed it on John Schneider. And then John Schneider was saying, hey, obviously some of those decisions come from the top of the management. I didn't really necessarily want to pull José Berríos, but then, Mark Shapiro came out and said Ross Atkins has to be more accountable. It was an absolute mess of a situation. And ultimately, I mean, it's because they lost the game, and they wouldn't have lost the game if John Schneider hadn't made that decision. They asked him directly about this decision, and it gets very, very interesting what they had to say. So John Schneider basically said, in terms of the communication process, and this means a lot going forward, even looking back to last year, we thought that any possible decision for the postseason was pretty well communicated before the series started. And when it doesn't go your way, it obviously gets highlighted. But I think from then to the offseason, to the beginning of the year, the back and forth, the coaching staff and the players has grown exponentially. So basically, he says, especially in the second half of the year, he's gone out of his way to talk to Clement, Heineman, Kirk, George Springer about time off and everything like that. Here's why I don't do it, and here's why I do some things, from my point of view and from my lens. So it seems that they learned a lot from last year, especially when it comes to the fact that, hey, he was obviously, whoever made the decision, it ultimately was probably a collective between coaches, front office, all those guys. If they do a better job at being communicative and just communicating with their players, with everybody, then things will ultimately be better for the team. It'll be better for the front office, and it'll be better for the fans, because ultimately, at the end of the day, all the Jays fans want, all the players want, all the front office wants is to win games in the playoffs. And it's something they haven't been able to do. So hearing that they're being more communicative between the players in the front office is very, very interesting. It's very important to be able to communicate and do all of those things. Now, again, he's communicating more this season with guys like Clement, with guys like Hyman, with guys like Kirk, guys like Springer. But ultimately, at the end of the day, this was a lost season, and they need to do that and translate these things next season, hopefully, when they're making the playoffs. But again, they asked him, when it comes to roster decisions, off-season decisions, how much of a voice do you have in those things? And he says he definitely has a voice. I don't think I need more of a voice, but I think we are pretty well aligned as to what our needs are and how we can get there. But definitely, I'm included. Pete Walker's included at a pretty high level, and he doesn't know compared to some of the other teams, but he feels that he's done a good job at, being in there when it comes to making a lot of these decisions, which, whether you agree with that or not, or whether you like that or not, is, up to you. It's up in the air. But I think at the end of the day, the fact that they are, John Schneider's coming out and being open about this is very good. And then the final question they asked was the contractual status of Guerrero and Bichette, what they mean to this team, and what role, if any, do you have in their futures. And he said, I don't know if it's me so much. I know they're comfortable with me. I'm comfortable with them. They've expressed their desire to be here for a long time. And they both understand how business works, though, at the end of the day. And then he also mentions the quote Bo made about wanting to win a World Series with Vlad. So he feels he's done a good job at expressing and doing his best to get them to stay in Toronto, specifically Vladdy and Bo. But ultimately, it's a business, and at the end of the day, there seems to be some mutual respect there. But he did say that they've communicated with him that they want to be there long term. So let me know in the comments your thoughts around all this. Tons of quotes to go around. This is something we're going to be tuning into as we go deeper and deeper into the season, because there's obviously a lot to discuss. Into the offseason, as there's going to be a lot to discuss. And this is kind of just the beginning of what's going to be one of the most crazy off seasons in Blue Jays history. So make sure to hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you guys tomorrow.